So let's get started. My name is Jeff Cote and I'm with Pacific Yacht Systems. Today's topic, what we're going to be talking about, is making sure that as a boat owner you can figure out what is the best battery for your boat and why. So a little bit about why we're here and why I'm here personally. I'm an owner-operator of Pacific Yacht Systems, been in business for now 11 years. You know, as a boater, I wanted a safe and reliable electrical system, and that's kind of what made me get into this business, because I wanted a boat that was not going to give me any troubles, and I wanted to be able to take friends and family on board. Batteries have a lot to do with safety. That's a lot of energy that you're going to have stored on your boat. If people are wondering a little bit why I'm here and why I'm talking to you, through expertise and repetition, we've come to, basically last year we did in 2017 about 750 boats electrically. And I've kind of come to a point where I have this passion for electrical systems on boat. I could be in finance, I could be doing other things, but for some reason my heart is on boats and related to electrical systems on boat. And the other thing I hope you're going to see, maybe not through this presentation or our booth and other team members upstairs, is that really we really work as a team and we share the information and kind of the insights that we have working on your boats. And that sort of insight is what I'm sharing with you today. So it's kind of like a collective of our experience as boaters and what we see working with other boaters and batteries that work, batteries that don't work. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So when you're talking about engine batteries, basically a lot of people talk about cranking battery. So there's really two types of flooded lead acid batteries, right? There's a battery to start an engine, and people use the term cranking. A lot of people also use a starting battery to run a thruster, because when you think about a thruster is meant to run a high load, right? A lot of amperage, runs a motor for a very short period of time. So a thruster and a starter are very similar in terms of their battery needs. The other thing too is that generally an engine battery is meant to be recharged right away. It's not a deep cycle battery. It's not a battery that's meant to be discharged for a long period of time. Same thing a little bit with what happens in a car. You know, your car starts, there's a big load on the battery for a short period of time, but right away the alternator kicks in and the batteries are getting recharged instantly. But what's key here, and I want to emphasize, is that a starting battery should never, ever, ever be used in a deep cycle application. Now, when you go to a battery store and you look at the price, you might be tempted, because the price of a starting battery might be half or 2/3 the price of a deep cycle battery, and you're thinking, well, going to save some money here, it's probably just a scam. Well, every year, probably about half a dozen times a year, we get called on a boat where a battery bank or a battery exploded. And sure enough, every battery that I've ever seen that's exploded is a starter battery used in a deep cycle application. And generally that happens when a boat is sold and someone is trying to save money. And so they're incented to buy the least expensive battery that they can buy. They sell it to unbeknownst to a future owner. The future owner uses the battery thinking it's a deep cycle battery, uses it in a starter battery in a deep cycle application, and that wear and tear ruins the battery, and at one point it boils a lot and you get a dead short. A lot of gassing happens and the battery explodes. And when a battery explodes on board a boat, it doesn't explode in the middle of a barn. So then what happens is, on this boat, for example, the hatch also exploded off the back of the deck, and the hatch was locked, so it tore off the bolts and it flew in the water. I had one guy, it exploded and it actually hit an operator on the leg. In the back, somebody was in the cockpit. So really, really essential, as a boat owner, what you want to make sure is that if you have batteries on your boat, and you probably do, make sure that the batteries that are used for as house batteries are actually deep cycle batteries and not starting batteries. Okay? They look identical, there's going to be a sticker that's going to say the application. So cranking batteries are engine batteries for engines and for nothing else. So here's an example of an 8D battery that's typical. You see that in a lot of trucks. You can see the caps at the top, so that's an indication that it's flooded. And you generally don't have to top off the liquids in a starter battery that much, because you really don't cycle it, right? You don't bring it down a lot. Right? You're going from 100% full to 99, 98% full, and then you're recharging it again, right? Because a starter battery doesn't get depleted. That's why I had an owner come into me, a boat owner come into me last year at the boat show, and he says, well, why, Jeff, why can Canadian Tire guarantee my starting battery for 10 years? And why can't other deep cycle manufacturers do the same? Well, the reason is that a starting battery really doesn't have a hard life. It does a little bit, and then it stops. A little bit, and then it stops. A deep cycle battery might go on a discharge for 4 days, 3 days, and it's probably not going to get charged back to 100%, and it's going to keep going. It's sort of like a workhorse. So don't expect anything. Your topping off of electrical fluids within a starter battery is going to be completely different than a deep cycle battery because they're treated differently aboard your boat. So basically, what's a deep cycle battery? It's used to supply the power to all your non-engine loads. It's made so that you can actually discharge it over a long period of time. Obviously, you're going to charge that battery either through an alternator, through solar panels, it could be a methanol fuel cell, it could be all different sources of ways of recharging a deep cycle battery. And the capacity or the unit of measure when buying a deep cycle battery is a unit called amp hours, right? When you buy a starter battery, you're buying cold cranking amps, CCA, or marine cranking amps. Marine cranking amps means it's not as cold. Cold cranking amps is actually much colder. And so, but when you buy a deep cycle battery, you're looking for an amp hour rating. Amp hour rating is how long would it take for that battery if it was discharged over a 20-hour period, what would be the maximum amount of time it could be discharged. So if you have, for example, a 200 amp hour battery bank, that means it will be able to run for 20 hours times 10 amps. So 10 amps for 20 hours gives you a 200 amp hour battery bank. So what are the lead acid choices? I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, am I going to talk about lithium or am I not going to talk about lithium? And it's such an outlier. We do lithium. If I work on 750 boats a year, I probably do 5 lithium jobs a year. So we do it, but it's not for everyone. So I decided, it's not that it's not a choice out there, but I'm deciding to focus for this presentation to the 99% of what everyone here in the room is going to choose. And that's going to be a lead acid battery. Now, lead acid comes with different choices, right? So you can either have flooded lead acid, which you can buy as either starter or deep cycle, or a hybrid. Some other companies call it dual purpose, right? It's sort of like an all-season tire. And then you have seal valve regulated batteries, SVR. And the first one that came out was gel. And this is this is important because when you're going to talk to a fellow boat owner, a lot of people use the word gel interchangeably to mean SVR, which means a lot of owners are going to say, boat owners are going to say, I have gel batteries on board. What they mean to say is I have SVR batteries on board and I have AGM. They're using the word interchangeably. Very few boat owners have gel nowadays. And we'll talk about why, but very few. If someone has an SVR battery, it's an AGM battery. And the last choice, AGM stands for Absorb Glass Mat Battery. And the last choice now, a latest and greatest battery with lead acid, is a carbon foam AGM battery. Okay, so that's kind of the list, and we'll do a rundown of every type of battery chemistry variations here. So you got flooded lead acid batteries. So what I'm trying to show there is that up front, a flooded lead acid battery, when you look at the sticker price, certainly has the lowest cost. No doubt about it, and I'm putting a single dollar sign. So lowest cost up front for sure is a flooded lead acid battery. Now there is an assumption there, and that's what my sub-bullet means is, the assumption is that you will maintain the binding contract that you will never, ever, ever leave the plates exposed to air. Meaning that regardless of all your life situations, marriages, divorces, children getting married, trips, vacations, life gets busy, whatever your excuses might be for not being able to top off the batteries don't care. And the moment you have those plates exposed on the batteries, you're in a losing battle. Basically, that battery will never forget, will never forgive, and it's going to give you a lot of grief. So never, ever leave a flooded lead acid battery with plates exposed. If you do, you're going to be going through a lot of water, and the batteries are going to be boiling prematurely all the time. When you recharge them, you're going to have to top them off, and it's this vicious cycle. So it's really important as a boat owner, if you decide to go with flooded lead acid batteries, you got to do so knowing that you will maintain and keep the electrolyte level within the battery above the battery plates. So as I mentioned, in a flooded lead acid battery, the electrolyte is in a liquid form, right? It's sulfuric acid. You also have to make sure when you buy a flooded lead acid battery that the battery is going to be within a watertight box. We do in our business about probably 300 electrical audits a year. And I would say 90 or 85% of you have battery boxes that either have holes in the bottom because the battery boxes didn't come with an instruction manual. And so the person that was mounting the battery box just didn't know how to hold it down, so they just drilled 4 holes in the bottom of the battery box. And they defeated the very purpose of what the battery box was there for, which is to be a watertight container for any spilled electrolyte. As the boat heals and moves, and maybe you overfill a cell, and then as you overfill a cell, it might not actually top over, but as the battery charges, the liquid heats up. As the liquid heats up, it expands. It's going to come up through the vent plate, will never evaporate, go in the bottom of the battery box, and then it will stay there forever until you neutralize the battery acid. So it's absolutely essential as a boat owner to keep your flooded lead acid batteries in a watertight battery box that goes right to the top of the battery, not a tray like you see in cars, okay? So that's for flooded lead acid batteries. For maintenance, I made sure and I emphasize the point that it's essential with a flooded lead acid battery that you top off the distilled water. People ask me all the time, how often should I do that? It really depends how often you discharge your batteries and also what sort of charger you have on board. If you have a really good charger on your boat, a smart charger that does not overcharge the batteries, you won't have to do it that often. Maybe in the wintertime when you're not using your boat, every 2 months, every 3 months. But in the summer, when you're actually using your boat a lot and you're discharging the batteries, as the batteries are getting recharged, they boil. That's just a normal occurrence. And so you've got to, when you're using your boat a lot and you're using your batteries a lot, you want to make sure that you top up the distilled water that's evaporated from recharging the batteries. The other important note is that a flooded lead acid battery has about a self-discharge rate of about 15% a month. That's why, for instance, my folks in Florida, when they're not there in the summer, there's someone in that actually drives their car every month around the parking lot for a half an hour. Because if they came back to their car 6 months later, the battery would be dead, even if it was disconnected. So we did work for DFO, and they had problems at DFO where they would leave a boat in some warehouse, and they would go pick it up only now and then. And when they would go pick it up because there was no charger, the battery would be dead. Not because someone left a load on, just because the battery self-discharges. And so what we did is we switched to AGMs, and AGMs only have 2% of self-discharge. So if your boat is on a buoy or rarely connected to a charger, an AGM battery is a good choice because it's going to hold the charge much longer. It's still going to self-discharge, but it won't self-discharge as fast as a flooded lead acid battery. And the other this is probably one of the most important details about batteries, and which is a little bit misleading. It's not all about cost, because what you see isn't what you get. With a lead acid battery, your usable amp hour capacity out of a battery is effectively only a third. Because you shouldn't discharge your battery below 50%. And realistically, when you charge it, unless you have oodles of time and you're charging it on a converter or an AC charger, your effective range when you're cruising is between 50 to 85%. That's it. That's all you have. So to get 200 amp hours of usable battery capacity, you're going to need 600 amp hour battery bank. Okay? So it's really a 1-to-3 ratio. So you really need a lot more batteries than you think when you're buying flooded lead acid batteries, because your floor is only at 50%. Here's an example of an L16. This is a 6-volt battery. We use that a lot. We would obviously wire them in series for a 12-volt, or again in series for a 24-volt, maybe 2 or 4, and then we'll start paralleling them, right? On one boat, I have 16 of those batteries. On another boat, there might be only 2, right? It really depends on the battery bank that you want, but this is kind of like a super-size golf cart batteries. So it's double the amp hours of a golf cart within the footprint of a golf cart. So it's a really convenient battery because you can have 4 golf cart batteries on your boat. On a 12-volt system, you have about 400 amp hours. And then basically what you're going to get is you're going to get another, with this, double that. So it's only 4 batteries, but it's 4 batteries, and now you have 800 amp hours. So a lot of owners choose a higher battery with limited floor space when they're choosing batteries. And we'll talk about battery sizes a little later, I mean. All right, so gel batteries. So gel batteries are about twice the cost of a flooded battery up front. The electrolyte can't be spilled. So you could drill a hole, doesn't matter, you don't really need a box because the electrolyte will never, you can't spill it, you could have it on its side, it won't matter. The electrolyte is in a gel state. It's also called, it's known as a seal valve regulated battery, which means it also limited gassing. When you think about a flooded lead acid batteries, there's a lot of gassing that happens when it's bulk charging and absorption charging. Gel batteries will keep the atmosphere at about 5 atmosphere pressure within, so they're going to gas but very little. That's how they remix everything in the battery. So they'll swell and they'll unswell over time. So you're not going to gas as much, all these corrosive gassing if you have a gel or AGM batteries. And that's one of the benefits of a seal valve regulated battery. Obviously no maintenance required. There's no caps, there's no nothing, there's no water. You put it in, you don't have a contract with it. It is what it is, you don't touch it. You put it in and it's done. Now, the reason why gel is not that popular, I bet in this room, I'd be shocked if there's one of you that actually has a real gel battery on their boat. Shocked. It's one maybe out of 100. Nothing wrong with it. I have a lot of my boat owners that have Tierras that have gel batteries from the factory. Gel batteries are the best battery for seal valve regulated. The only issue is that you need to have an alternator and a charger that is perfectly dialed in for a gel battery. And that gotcha is a problem for every one of us because alternators by default will overcharge a gel. Chargers by default will overcharge a gel. And that's why gel batteries and seal valve regulated batteries got a bad rap 10, 15 years ago. And so in the end, everyone left them. Only top-end builders are still using them where they build them from scratch, where the whole boat the boat electrical system is built around a gel battery. So I would rarely ever go and tell a new boat owner or an existing boat owner, hey, by the way, we're going to change your flooded lead acid batteries and we're going to go to gel. Because that means I have to do too many other things to go to gel. I'll say instead of that, if we're going to go seal valve regulated, let's go to AGM. Much easier transition. Self-discharge, and I talked about that. That's one big advantage with seal valve regulated. It's only about 2% a month. Okay, so that's really good for a boat that's, is unattended and doesn't have any charger connected to it. Now, here's the good news. With a gel battery, the floor discharge is around 30%. So you've got between 85 and 30% range. So that gives you 55% of the battery is available. Meaning, when it's time to buy a battery, instead of buying a 600 amp hour battery bank, to get 200 amp hours, you only need to buy a 400 amp hour battery bank to get 200. Okay? And that's what the last point is. By the way, this presentation is going to be posted on our website in a PDF format under media at the end of the boat show. So you're going to be able to access all of that. All right, AGM batteries, similar price to gel, right? Double the price of a flooded battery. The electrolyte, instead of being in a gel, it's in a glass mat. Again, it's a seal valve regulated battery. No maintenance is required. You can't do anything for maintenance. Really low self-discharge, which we all like. Same battery capacity, about 55%. So really, you look at gel and AGM, they're pretty much the same. The reason why, when I talk about redoing an electrical system for boat owners, why 99% of us go to AGM is the fact that we can actually drop ship an AGM battery bank and not have to do anything about the alternators. Because a standard alternator with an internal regulator will kill a gel battery. A week, it's going to be done. So that's why we always choose AGM. Gel's great, but it's just too finicky and it's too hard to retrofit in an existing system. All right, so here's an AGM battery. You can notice the top is completely, there's no caps, there's nothing. It's just simply all covered. There's nothing to do. You just simply connect the positive and the negative and you're done. All right, so what is a Firefly battery? We write a column in Pacific Yachting called Tech Talk every month, and we've done probably 2 or 3 articles or columns about Firefly. So basically it's an AGM battery, but a more advanced AGM battery. So about 3 times the price of a flooded battery, right? So $1 sign for flooded, $2 sign for AGM gel. Firefly AGM is $3 signs. So you got all the benefits of AGM. So leak proof, limited gassing, maintenance free. You've got a fast recharge rate, which is really good with AGM. Limited self-discharge, right? Very low, 2%. So all the benefits of AGM are part of that battery. But what's crazy about that battery is it gives you 12 times the battery life of a flooded battery. A flooded lead acid battery, if you discharge it to 50% and recharge it every time, will give you it can do that 300 times. 300. You take it from 100, you bring it to 50, you recharge, you could do that 300 times. A Firefly AGM is going to do it 3,600 times. So in terms of battery life, it's a factor of 12. So that's a really big benefit of the Firefly battery. And the title in our Tech Talk column was, is this going to be the last battery you'll ever buy for your boat? I was joking with another boat owner in the booth. I was like, it's almost going to be on your will and testament. It's going to be a family heirloom. You know, I mean, at one point in 15, 20 years, you're going to give it to your daughter, and it's going to be the boat and the batteries, you know, because they're still going to be around. It's sort of like lithium. So 3,600 cycle versus flooded lead acid at 300 cycles. The other great thing about a Firefly battery is that it never ages because of partial state of charge. Meaning, when battery manufacturers, and this is why battery manufacturers don't give long warranties with batteries, is because they never know that when you're going to discharge a battery, they know that you will never recharge it instantly. In the lab, that's what they do. They don't discharge a battery to 50%, go away for 2-3 weeks. Oh, you know what? It's time to recharge the battery to 100%. And they do that for a 2-year period, and they go, oh, great, we have 300 cycles. In a lab, they're going to do everything to their advantage. They're going to take a battery to 100%, discharge it to 50, and the moment it gets to 50, they're going to recharge it back full 100%, wait, and then repeat, right? They're not going to take any chances because they're trying to brag about how many times you can do it, so they're going to follow the test. The test is you start at 100, get to 50, charge right back away, right to the top, and do it over again. But that's not real. That's not a real world experience. As a boater, how often do you bring your battery to 50%, and instantly the moment you get to 50%, you're back to shore power, and you can bring back the battery to 100% to repeat it again? That's practically never going to happen in the real world, and that's why a battery never gives you what you thought it would give you, because the real world doesn't match what the environment in the test world is. What's so spectacular about the Firefly is that the Firefly can live in that partial state of discharge, meaning it could stay at 50% for a year, and after a year you recharge it, put it back on a charger, and you'll still have the original full 100% capacity of that battery. So the battery, for example, is spec'd at 110 amp hours for a Group 31. A year later, even though you left it sitting at 50% for a year, you recharge it, you'll get 110 amp hours again. If you did that with an AGM battery or a lead acid battery, after a year you'd get, if you're at 55 amp hours, you'd get 56 amp hours. The top end that was uncharged for a year would be gone. It would be what's called sulfated, right? And so that capacity would be gone forever, and you'd be left with only the capacity that was not used of the battery. And so that's what's so key about the Firefly batteries, is it can live in that partial state of discharge. So when you're cruising in the summer and you're away from shore power for a week or 3 days or 2 months or whatever, it won't age prematurely because you're in a partial state of discharge until you get back to shore power. Connect a charger and then bring the batteries back to 100%. The downside of Firefly is there's only 2 battery sizes available. You can either choose a Group 31 or what's called an L15, L16. Sort of like the battery I was talking about, golf cart footprint, but higher, like 15 inches. A golf cart's about 11 inches, 11 3/4. Now, here's the other benefit of a Firefly battery is the depth of discharge can go all the way down to 20%. Remember flooded was at 50 and AGM was around 30? Well, this battery, you can go from 85 to 20. So when it's time to buy a battery, you only need a 300 amp hour battery bank to get to 100 amp hours. And so basically, compared flooded to AGM Firefly, you need half the batteries to do the same job. Okay? I'll take questions at the end, by the way. feel free on any topic, but probably preferably batteries. Here's a typical install that we did. This owner went, he has 6 basically group 31 batteries wired in parallel, 12 volt battery. This is a Grand Banks 49, I think, older wooden boat. Okay, so we talked about the different types of batteries, right? To recap, we talked about flooded lead acid, you either have starter batteries or deep cycle batteries. We talked about seal valve regulated, you have gel, AGM, and Firefly AGM, right? So those are kind of your choices. So those are the tools that you have in your toolkit to figure out what are you going to do in terms of battery bank. Now that you know what you can use, you got to figure out what you need. So what do you need? So the first thing you've got to realize is, well, the question is, and it's kind of a rhetorical question that my clients ask me and I ask them, is like, how many batteries do I need? Well, I ask them in turn, sort of like, how much money do I need for my retirement? Well, how much money do you spend a year, right? I need to know what is your daily consumption of power on your boat so that we can calculate the battery bank that you're going to need. So first is, what is your daily power need, right? And if you don't know and you're curious, I can probably guess after the class or come into the booth. I can probably get a really good sense. I mean, it's not going to be, there's always exceptions, but most people fall within a normal range. And the next thing is, remember, is that nobody in this room probably thinks that they use a lot of power on their boat. That's the general rule. Like, nobody thinks that they use a lot of water until they get onto a boat and they realize how limited water is, and they empty a 60-gallon tank taking a shower. Power is very much the same thing. Power is one of those things that nobody thinks they use a lot, but in the end, my whole business is predicated in providing that power. So remember, refrigeration is a large draw. So if you have refrigeration on your boat, you're drawing a lot of power, massive amounts of power. Without refrigeration, you're a Luddite. With refrigeration, you are not a Luddite for power. Inverters draw a lot of power, and the other thing that is surprisingly draw a lot of power is heaters. The heat itself might be generated through fuel, but the distribution of that heat throughout the boat is ran through pumps that send coolant or air, right? And the fans on the heat exchangers are also powered by electricity. And that electricity is not powered by the diesel part, it's actually powered by your batteries. So for example, I have a hydronic system on my boat, a heating system. In the wintertime, that draw might be between 5 and 12 amps, depending on how many fans are blowing, right? It's not continuous, comes on and off, but it's way more than my refrigeration. So my power loads, or my daily load in the wintertime, like I was boating at Christmas for 2 weeks, my daily load in the wintertime is way more than my daily load in the summer. In the summer, it might be only 90 amp hours, but in the winter, it's like 200, 250 amp hours, right? So your daily consumption of power is going to really fluctuate depending on the season that you're boating. So here are some examples of typical amp hour budgets of different sizes of boats. What I do want to emphasize here is that no two boats are the same. You know, we have a lot of boat owners that are, for example, have a Grand Banks 42. It's a pretty popular boat. I've got, I don't know, dozens and dozens of owners. Not all of them use only 175 amp hours. Some people have a deep freeze on the flybridge. Some people don't watch any TV. They close the lights. As soon as it gets dark, they go to bed. They wake up with the sunlight. They're very kind of bare bones. They only have refrigeration, and that's it. Other owners that have a Grand Banks 42 have satellite TV. They have sound system, they have a deep freeze on the top. They might use 250 amp hours a day, and some might use 100. The numbers I give you there are on average for that size boat, right? But it's hard to tell. So if you don't know, you come and ask me, and I can probably guess. Now, if you don't like guessing and you want to know for a fact, what you want is a battery monitor, which is effectively a fuel gauge for your batteries. And that takes the whole guesswork out of it. It's sort of like having an accountant come and tell you your state of your finances. You know, you can wonder how you're doing, or you can have someone tell you. And the battery monitor is not going to lie. It's not an abstract process. It counts all the amps going in and out of your batteries, and it will tell you, black and white, what is your daily amp hour consumption. And from that number, then you can start sizing your battery bank. This is probably my #1 favorite electrical device on all boats, because it's sort of like a compass. If you're, you know exactly where you are and where you're going with your electrical system. Without that, you're guessing. You're always guessing. You never know. A battery monitor is really, really useful. And they're not that expensive. They range from probably $250 to $400. but 250 to 300 buys you a really good one. All right, so now that you know what your daily amp hour consumption, what's the next step? Well, that's one thing, but how long are you going to go without recharging your batteries, right? Some people like to stay in anchorage for a day, and then they're going to run a generator. Some people are going to stay a sailboater. I'm a sailboater. I might stay 2 days at anchor, 3 days at anchor until I have power again, right? So there's one thing to know what your daily amp hour consumption is, but then you've got to multiply it by how long are you going to go without finding a charging source. Are you a type of owner that's going to go to Alaska on a sailboat where you're going to run the engine 8 hours a day, every day for the next 2 months up, 2 months down? Or are you type of owner, for example, some of my boat owners, they go up to Gambier, they head there and they stay at the dock, no power for a week, right? So 7 days without power, right? That's their battery bank is all they have. They're not planning on running, they don't have a generator. They need the batteries that they need for 7 days. That's extreme. Most people are going to be maybe half a day to 3 days. That's kind of the range. And half a day would be a powerboat owner that runs this generator every 12 hours, okay? So once you know your daily amp hour budget, what you do is you calculate what is going to be your usable battery capacity. So daily times the amount of time that you're going to be. So for instance, what I'm saying is if your daily amp hour budget is 200 and you plan on being 2 days at anchor without recharging, you need a battery bank that is 400 amp hours, right? 200 amp hours a day for 2 days. You need a battery bank that's going to give you 400 amp hours of usable battery capacity. So here I'm rehashing the slides I talked about before, and I'm trying to remember the battery floor. Remember when we were talking about batteries? A flooded battery is around 50%, AGM gel is around 30%, and a Firefly AGM is 20%. Well, if you take that into consideration and you remember that the ceiling for all those flooded acid batteries is around 85%, the difference between 50 to 85 is 35. The difference between 30 and 85 is 55, and the difference between 20 and 85 is 65. And that's really important because when it comes to sizing a battery bank, you're going to need more batteries to do a lead acid battery, twice what you would need of a Firefly batteries, okay? So here's a little bit table, and what I'm trying to emphasize is, yeah, your Firefly AGM is 3 times the price of a flooded, but it's going to give you at 20% depth of discharge 4 times the battery life of a flooded battery, and the capacity is double that of a flooded battery. So we crunched the number, and we have a slide on our booth. Your cost per amp hour is about 1/3 less with Firefly than it is with flooded. But of course, if you don't use your boat and you just put the batteries in and you walk away, then flooded lead acid batteries are the right choice for you. If you're going to use your boat a lot and you plan on boating in the summers and you're keeping it, and you have a horizon with the boat, you're not going to sell it in a year or 2 years or at the end of the season, then it's worth considering Firefly or AGM. And that's the other table, is that if you're going to start sizing a battery bank, you're going to need to multiply. If you needed 400 amp hours like we talked before, or 200, let's say, you're going to need a battery bank of 600 amp hours with flooded, 400 with AGM, or 300 with Firefly. In our booth upstairs, I think it's number 322, what we did is we did actually a pyramid, show you kind of what it is. I mean, you either need 6 batteries, 4 batteries, or 3 batteries. And so what I find a lot of boat owners are doing is they're saying, okay, let me save space. I might need all this battery capacity, but I don't have the space on my boat to put them, right? It's one thing to need something, but where are you going to put it on a boat? It's not a barn. It's not a barge. You don't have endless space, right? You're confined. So as a boat owner, what people are saying is saying, well, okay, a Firefly or an AGM battery is going to give me better energy density, so it's a way for them to have more energy in smaller footprint, right? And that's why a lot of owners are considering, or boat owners are considering, to go to an AGM battery as a way to get higher energy density and also save weight. The other point that's really essential is when it's time to actually buy a battery, remember that batteries come in all different sizes, okay? So you can have, and in the marine world, now there's way more than these sizes, but these are the common battery sizes in the marine market. So you're going to hear names like Group 24, Group 27, Group 31, Golf Cart, Slimline, L16. Those 8D, 4D, That's kind of the repertoire of batteries in the marine world. Now that has no indication of the chemistry of the battery, right? So, and that's what I say down below. I say you can buy a golf cart in AGM, in gel, or flooded lead acid battery, right? So you pick and choose. What is the dimension of the battery, which is golf cart, and what is the chemistry of the battery, right, in lead acid? Flooded, gel, or AGM. Now I did mention that Firefly only comes in two sizes, right? So it's only group 31 or L16. Those are the only two choices that you have for Firefly. But for all other makes or sizes of batteries, you can actually choose whatever chemistry you want. And the other thing too is that every manufacturer, or a lot of the big manufacturers are going to have, like you can buy an East Penn Deca battery, group 31 gel. You can buy a Trojan battery, group 31 gel. So manufacturers, so like in lumber, you're going to, Goodfellow or Weyerhaeuser are going to create wood. They're going to make a 2x4, and one's going to make it in, I don't know, cedar, and the other one's going to make it in birch. They're all going to have the same line. So you can buy a Trojan battery golf cart flooded lead acid. You can probably buy a Trojan golf cart AGM, Trojan golf cart gel. So you've got to basically choose the battery manufacturer, the battery size, and then the battery chemistry when you buy a battery, okay? So they're not fixed. I've got a lot of boat owners that say to me, oh, I've got golf cart, I can't go AGM. No, there's no problem. You can have golf cart. Many of us have golf carts on our boat. It's probably the most prevalent battery type besides a 4D or an 8D on the bigger trawler size. And same thing with an AD. You can have an AD on your boat, and you can have an AD flooded lead acid starter or flooded lead acid deep cycle, and you can also buy it in AGM, okay? So you're really not bound in choosing the battery that you want on your boat. There's a lot of choice. I want to rehash and emphasize the importance of when you choose a battery for your boat, especially a flooded lead acid battery, that you make sure that you have a starter battery for your engines and a deep cycle batteries for your house. And never, ever a starter battery for your house, okay? Because of what I talked about, the risk of explosion on your boat. By the way, when a battery explodes on your boat, it's not just an explosion. Battery acid goes everywhere. And your engine room generally is full of metal. And now you've got sulfuric acid covered in your engine room. It's a disaster. I can't emphasize how expensive that is. It will really dampen or put a bleak downer in your cruising experience when a battery explodes on your boat. Besides the safety implications, just cleaning it up it's utterly, it's massive undertaking. All right, so we talked about battery chemistry. We talked about sizing the battery bank. Then the next question is, now you have a battery bank on your boat, and this is a common issue that is overlooked. And people then blame batteries being unreliable. But what they don't realize is when the builder designed your boat, it had the intention, it thought about a battery bank, and then it took a charger to recharge that battery bank. Meaning, if you quadruple your battery bank size or double your battery bank size, unfortunately, you cannot assume that your battery charger is now sized to recharge all battery banks. It isn't. Battery chargers are designed and sized for a battery bank in mind. And what that ratio is, the common ratio is, you size a charger for 10% of your battery capacity. So for instance, if you have a 400 amp hour battery bank, you're going to need a 40 amp charger, okay? Now you're thinking maybe, oh, Jeff, well, 20 is just going to take twice as long. And that's true, it would take twice as long. But the problem is you need to be able to charge the batteries at a very high rate at bulk. If you don't, you will not re-energize everything in the battery. The battery to you will look charged. It's going to go back to 99%. And you can't tell the difference between a 99% full battery and a 100% full battery. How would you tell? You're not going to tell. It's 1 point. Next time you recharge, you're going to recharge 99% of 99%. And then you're going to be at 98.1% battery. Next time you recharge, you're going to charge 99 of 98.1. And so what happens is your battery dies slowly. It's not sudden death. It's not a great battery forever. Is instead of lasting you 5, 7, 8 years, it lasts you 2 or 3 years. And that happens if you have a battery charger that is undersized for a larger battery bank, right? And that is one of the most disconcerting things as a boat owner that I certainly found when I bought my boat on April Fool's Day, 2006, is that I always thought, hey, listen, I buy a car, everything on the car is figured out, I don't need to think about it. What it is what it should be, right? Nobody's mucked around, nobody's changed anything. Everything's done to the code, everything's right. Just change a part, if it's there, it's gotta be smart. That's the first disconcerting reality as a boat owner, is that you can assume nothing on a boat is right. You just can't. You have to always be critically thinking. I don't think my builder put all these batteries on the boat. Well, when they changed the batteries, did they change the charger? And you can bet 19 out of 20, the other owner didn't think about that, was very excited about putting new batteries and assumed, which is always a fallacy on a boat, never assume anything, that the charger would just take care of it. And then he's been complaining about his batteries failing all the time, not knowing that the batteries fail not because they're bad, it's just because there's not enough of a charge rate. So you want about 10% of your battery charger has to be 10% of battery capacity, okay? Now, the other point too is that 10% is the minimum, but there's also a ceiling, right? So you can't put any, like I had a client one day came to me and he put a 160 amp alternator on a 30-foot boat recharging 2 golf cart batteries. I was like, awesome, you're keener. We're both wanting a lot of energy, but your 2 golf cart batteries, which are 220 amp hours, are gonna take a maximum charge rate of about 50 amps, and that's theoretical, and that's gonna last for a very short period of time. So your 160 amp alternator is effectively useless because your batteries will only take about 50 amps coming into them, right? And so again, it's like an orchestra. Everything is kind of be in sync. So when you size your charger for flooded lead acid batteries, your ceiling is around 25% of capacity. And ceiling means that's really the maximum. So as a boat owner, you gotta do minimum of 10, maybe find the sweet middle, 10, 15%, maybe 20, but you'll never see 25. And if you see 25, it's only gonna be for a very short period of time. And that's the other advantage, is AGMs have a ceiling of 40. And you're thinking, well, why would 40 be better than 25? Well, as a boat owner, if you have a large battery bank, you might want to recharge that battery bank quicker, I guess, quickly. So how do you do that? Well, what owners are doing is they're actually, and we'll talk about it in the next slide, they're adding multiple chargers. So I have one owner, he has a 1200 amp hour battery bank, and his charge rate is 350 amps into a 1200 amp hour battery bank. So he has a genset, and he runs his genset for about an hour and a half, and then he's done for a week, and then he repeats. So he's a power boater that came from sailboating, and so when he runs his genset, he wants to run his genset, but he wants to run it for a very short amount of period of time.
Quick question, Jeff. When you say gel, we can assume that's Firefly as well?
The gel, no. It would be, no, AGM is AGM, gel is gel. Firefly is another choice. So it's Firefly AGM, AGM, and gel.
Sorry, Firefly would charge at the same rates.
Yeah, absolutely. Firefly, yes. Firefly and AGM is a subset, or Firefly is a subset of AGM, and so an AGM and Firefly AGM are the same thing. And so yeah, you're going to be able to charge a Firefly AGM at about maximum 40% of capacity. Okay? All right, so when it's time to talk about recharging, obviously there's many ways of recharging batteries, right? A common way, and we hear all the time, and on a lot of older boats, they were actually called converters, right? Which is the opposite of an inverter. So a converter stands for taking AC to DC. An inverter is taking DC to AC. Nowadays, they've let go the name converter, and converter doesn't mean anything. It's a word that somebody defines something for. Today, they use the word charger. And what a charger does is it implies actually kind of a smart charging profile. Converters simply, if they were left on for long periods of time, they would boil a battery over. That's why a lot of boat owners in the past had to turn a battery charger or converter on for a period of time and then turn it off and then turn it on and turn it off. They couldn't be left on 24/7. Those were converters. And nowadays, they're called chargers. You obviously have your alternator as a way to recharge your batteries, right? One or many alternators. There's methanol fuel cells now. There's solar, there's DC generators, there's wind turbines, there's towing generators. And in case you're wondering why there's not a generator on this, the generator itself doesn't recharge the battery. The generator creates AC, and the AC runs a charger, and the charger recharges the batteries. So a generator is basically just a source of AC power, and then that AC power is used to run AC loads, and one of those AC loads is going to be your charger. So here what I'm trying to emphasize is there's a really big difference, and especially if you're going to start investing into new batteries for your boat, you want to make sure that you have a battery charger that can handle different battery chemistries. Right? You can't assume that your battery charger, your flooded lead acid battery charger, or your 25-year-old battery charger is going to be doing all battery chemistries. You need to see a profile, a setting on there, either on the remote panel or on the charger itself, where you can select flooded lead acid battery, AGM battery, or gel battery. And you need to choose the right profile for the batteries. For instance, I had a boat owner, West Vancouver Yacht Club. I saw him on his third sets of AGM batteries. First time of AGM batteries, he was very unlucky, extremely frustrated. Bought AGM batteries, they only lasted a year. Devastating. Second time, he gets warranty, gets replaced. Again, same thing. Terrible luck. How's that possible? Third time, something's wrong. We get a call, we come on board. That battery actually was completely fine. There's nothing wrong with the battery, is that the charger profile was completely off. He was chronically undercharging the battery. He had the charger set to fixed, which was 13.5. And so the batteries would recharge, but very slowly, and they would sulfate, right? That death that I was talking about, a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. And his batteries, instead of lasting him 7 to 9 years, would give him 1 to 2 years. So if you're going to go through the hassle of buying new batteries for your boat, and they're not lead acid, and you're changing the chemistry, make sure that your charger can actually recharge that battery at the right voltages, okay? And it doesn't sound like a lot, 0.1 volts, 0.2 volts, 0.3 volts, but 0.2, 0.1 volt is a lot when it comes to battery charging. It really is, okay? Those are the differences that matter. And that I talked about that a little bit earlier, and this is the reason why some owners are going to AGM, is because what they're doing is they're saying, hey, I'm running my generator for 8 hours a day. I want the ability to run my generator for only 4 hours a day or 2 hours a day. How can I reduce the time it takes me to recharge the batteries? I'm doing that right now on a 41-foot trawler. The generator runs all the time. It's noisy. It runs unloaded, right? Because the generator, at one point, there's no more loads to run other than the charger. And so the generator doesn't like running unloaded. It runs maybe at 70%, 80%. So what we're doing is we're adding chargers. On this boat, it's a rather small generator, so about 6 kilowatts. And so we're adding 2 chargers that are going to basically reduce the charge rate about 2/3. So instead of running the generators for 4-hour days, they're going to run the generator for 1 hour and 15 minutes a day. And they're able to do that because they're going with AGM batteries, and AGM batteries have a higher charge rate. With flooded, they wouldn't have been able to do that. This is going to be one of the last slides, and I want to emphasize, in case you're wondering if you have a Ferro resonant charger, which is kind of like an old school charger or a modern charger, go down to the looks. And Ferro resonant chargers were built in about the late 60s and 70s, and they're going to look very outdated. I call them ugly. They look like it was an engineer-driven process. I'm an engineer, but there was nobody involved in the design of that box. It was a strictly functional device, and it's going to look like from an other era. That is basically a Ferro resonant charger. Any smart charger has a nice case. There's a lot of marketing involved. It's going to be shiny. There's going to be a lot of bells and whistles. It's going to look new. An old charger is going to look old, sort of like an analog phone from the 70s. And so if you have a Ferro resonant charger on your boat, unfortunately, A, you should not leave it on 24/7, because otherwise you're going to cook the batteries. And second, you cannot go to AGM, you can't go to gel, you can't go to Firefly AGMs, because that charger is simply not going to have a charge profile that's going to allow you to recharge those batteries at the right voltages. Okay? So if you're stuck on keeping that charger on your boat, you have to stick with flooded lead acid batteries. And basically I'm closing up. Just want to emphasize, here at PYS, most of everyone on the team are boaters. I'm a boater as well. Want to demonstrate that at the end of the day, especially if you're going to do work on your boat, learn from others, right? There's a lot of common knowledge, and that's the purpose of this talk right here, is to share through common experiences, blogs, whatever it is, books. And if you've got any questions, remember safety on the water is really important, especially with electrical. So I'm going to basically leave it at that, and I'm going to start asking questions at this point, leaving the floor for questions. Any question on batteries or anything related to marine electrical? Yes, go ahead.
I got a set of flooded golf cart batteries on my boat. They're about 8 years old.
Yeah.
And somebody said just old batteries, the plates get worn, there's a danger of explosion.
Yes, that's true.
Old batteries.
Yeah, that's actually right. So the question is, this boat owner has batteries that are 8 years old, and he's been told that as batteries age, there's a chance for explosion. And that's right, because what happens, first of all, remember that batteries are not going to fail at the dock, and they're not going to fail under no use. So do not gauge the winter to be an indication of the quality of your batteries. Something that is not used, really, is not going to be an indication of how it's going to do the next cruising season. Batteries fail. We never get called out to replace a broken battery in the winter. We get called out to replace broken batteries or failed battery banks in the summer when people are using their boats. And that's not a coincidence, because there's no chargers and now the batteries are being used a lot. And failure on a battery is not always a slow death, right? Some people, fall asleep in the middle of the night and they go passing in the night. Not all batteries end that way. What happens is you use a battery, especially a smaller battery bank that gets used a lot. As the material is being used, some of that material sheds off the plates. And there's a space at the bottom of the battery for that material to fall. It's kind of like snowflakes. And generally that metal, that surface area that falls, it sheds down and goes at the bottom. Over time, that pile gets higher and higher and higher. What happens is that happens. And then what happens is battery age, they need to be topped off more, right? They need more and more water because they have a higher resistance, which is normal because of sulfation. Owners forget that. They think that the first year or the second year is an indication of what it's going to be the last year. So now they have their whole habits and they're like, oh, I only need to check my battery every 3 months. But the last year of the battery, you need to check it more often because it's going to actually boil over faster because it has a higher resistance. Then what happens is you're not checking your battery levels, and the battery level, the fluid level is going down, and at one point the plates are going to be exposed, and now the air pocket as it's being charged is full of hydrogen, right? That's what it is, your hydrogen gas. It's explosive. So it's going down, and at one point the plates are going to be exposed. And the plates also, as the batteries are actually wearing down, they start to buckle. Now the plates are actually electrically charged. They're a different potential. That's what it is. It's a battery. They're not the positive, negative, right? What happens is either the plates at one point will buckle and touch, but they're not touching underwater, under sulfuric acid, where there's no chance of a spark. They touch where now they're exposed to air. And that air is not just air, because I can put a spark here, nothing's going to happen. But an air in a battery that's contained, that's full of hydrogen gas, causes an explosion. So at one point as a boat owner, you've got to ask yourself, how far do I want to push my luck? Right? And that's a question for all of us. There is no right answer. But I can tell you, as a lead acid battery, the longest I've ever heard a lead acid battery last, ever, of all the owners I've ever heard, is 11 years. Now that is the outlier, the person that lived 120 years old. Okay? That's me talking to, thousands of boaters a year, and I've heard someone last 11 years. So that's a 120-year-old battery, effectively in human years. The question is, how far do you think you're going to be that lucky, right? And where is a reasonable point where you need to start thinking about a preemptive time to change? Flooded lead acid batteries generally last between 5 and 7 years. That's the range. So at 8, you're doing pretty good. You're doing pretty good. Can you make it to 9? Maybe. And then the question is, where do you boat and how do you boat? Are you only going to English Bay and you come back in the evening, and if you have a battery problem, you get a tow, whatever, you're close to home? Or what kind of cruising are you doing? Are you going to the Gulf Islands, Desolation? Are you doing Discovery Islands? Are you going to do the Browns? Are you doing Central Coast? Are you doing outside of Vancouver Island? Because the further you go, sometimes I wake up in the morning and I tell one of my technicians, I'm like, oh, by the way, today you're not going there. You're getting on a float plane. Here are some batteries. We're going to go so-and-so. This person now didn't do a preventive change. We got to bring batteries. they're stuck. There's no other way. And here you go, fly off, bring new batteries. So now, here in Vancouver, it's no big deal. There's everywhere you can buy batteries. The question as a boat owner you have to figure out is how far can you go and how expensive is it going to be when you're in the middle of nowhere? And that would be a trade-off. I think at 9 years, personally, you're close. You're pretty close. I mean, you're not going to get another 3 years. It's not going to happen. Other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
The claims for the benefits of the methanol fuel cell seems to answer a lot of the objections to flooded lead batteries.
How would you say that? Like in what way?
Well, it automatically comes on as soon as the battery reaches 50%, and it can run for as long as it needs to get it back up to 100%.
Correct.
Basically, you're treating your battery respectfully every day.
Correct. Yeah, so the question is about the methanol fuel cell, which I happen to have on my boat. And a methanol fuel cell will automatically turn itself on when the battery voltage gets around 12.3, and you can change that voltage, and it will bring it back to 100%. Mind you, it does it slowly, but it still does it. So it doesn't allow the battery to go all the way down. And it's sort of like a methanol fuel cell. I should have done a presentation this year about it, but it's sort of like a battery charger, a turtle battery charger. You know, it's not something you would use all the time, but when you're cruising, it's really going to offset bringing your batteries too low on the depth of discharge. And what I'm finding a lot of owners is they're saying to me, I don't want to bring too much batteries on board because batteries are only so good. You need a way to recharge them. And a methanol fuel cell is a way to limit your battery bank size and have a charger that doesn't need AC to work. The fuel or the power source, instead of being alternating current, is methanol. And I could go along into that, but I'm going to leave it at methanol, and I'll take questions on methanol a little bit later. Yes, go ahead.
For the battery monitors, I've been reading about the Balmar and the Victron, and there seems to be quite a different operating mechanism between some of the lead shunts. Some just go to the battery.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. So the question is about how do you choose a battery monitor? There are two ways of doing it. Balmar came up with a new way called the Smart Gauge, and they're inferring battery capacity through voltage. And another way is doing it through what's called shunts. I'm a really big fan of shunts. That's my preferred way. I like tried and true. So Victron does one, Mastervolt does one, Blue Seas does one, Xantrax does one. I would go with tried and true. I know there's really good press about the Smart Gauge. I'm just on the fence about it. I want something on my boat to be proven like years, like a decade before I go, I'm on board. There's no need to be a guinea pig, in my opinion. Any other question? One last question? Yeah?
With the Firefly, you say in an L16, is it similar amp hours to what you'd have in an L16 in another AGM?
A little bit less because the footprint is, the weight is a little bit less, but similar, but different, yeah.
They're a bit lighter.
Yeah, they're lighter. They're only 98 pounds. And they come in 2 volts and 4 volts. So you need to buy 3 in an L16. Or you can make the perfect battery and buy 6 and have 2 volt cells. Because the best battery is a series battery. I'm going to probably have to, okay, one more, last question.
Charging voltage for 2 Fireflies. Which should I set the regulator to?
Yeah, the Firefly is, it's been modified. It's been actually increased this year. I think the float, and I'm going by memory, I've got probably an article on it. I think it's 13, it used to be 13.2 for float. Now it's about 13.4. And the bulk rate, or the top end, is the first one, absorption bulk, is around 14.6. It used to be 14.4. They've actually brought the numbers up by about 0.2 volts now.
They claim you can hit them hard.
Pardon?
They claim that you can hit them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they've actually brought the voltages higher now. Yeah. I'm going to leave it at that. We've got about 2 minutes, so we're going to let the next presenter talk. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time.